Shalom.
Shalom, shalom. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Okay. Where we start? Okay. So, anyways, okay. So, just
tell them what just happened.
why is it going to be so loud? That's one thing that's different about overseas versus America. Like, I feel like people in America like talk in a way that people don't hear them. But like for some reason, like overseas, not just in Israel, but like just other like Arab countries, places I've been, it's like they speak so loud in the phone, and I'm just like, but why though? Like the phone's like right there, you know?
Well, you haven't spent much time in the South, have you?
Yeah.
Are they loud too in the South on the phone?
We loud down here.
Wow. So, all right, so we fit in perfectly out here. All right, so anyways, I was having a conversation with Otina earlier today, and I was talking about this idea of like, just everything like moving forward. You know, the challenge is that initially, we talk about like say the African American connection to to the Israelites, right? To different tribes in West Africa, the whole narrative, right? Now the thing is like this. To really expand that idea, you're going to have to deal with a few issues. Okay. Number one, I'm going off of the terminology that were created by other people, meaning one, the terminology of, say, transatlantic slave trade. That's a term that has a definition, that has a series of meanings that people have written about. Same thing by, the term Black or African American or Negro, or even the concept of, or even the concept of Igbo, right? Or the concept of West Africa, the concept of Nigeria, all these different terms that are based around this idea. I don't have any control over these points, meaning that, like, so say I come out and I say, hey, you know what? I talk to the Igbos and, they're connected, and there's rabbis here who say they're connected. A lot of those people were in transatlantic slave trade. So when you go out and you present those ideas, right? Now, in order to have this idea to grow, it has to be somehow engaged in academia, right? Because academia, in essence, like creates the pendulum of valuable information and not valuable information, right? And so by engaging it in that frame, you want to make it valuable. Now, the key to engaging it into academia, that academia has, different departments, and these different departments have department heads, and they decide what's instituted and what's promoted, what's not promoted, how much is promoted, all these things, right? So from that perspective, but why are you so loud though? So from that perspective, it's like this. It's saying that when I go and meet with that XYZ professor, right? Or if I go and meet with, XYZ organization, right? And I say, hey, here's the African American narrative, right? So I say maybe I start with the Igbos, use them as an example, right? So what Igbo is and what Igbo is not, that's not determined by, the few 100,000 Igbos that practice Judaism. There's 50 million Igbos. I mean, just in Nigeria, let alone around the world, right? And they have their own institutions and this. And Christianity is a big concept, 19th century, they have institutions around it, families, dynasties, historical books, traditions, right? So they have all that. So I come in there and say, oh, but they were actually Jewish. And it's like, wait, who are you to tell us who we are? That's not true. Read this book, read that book. This is our true history. Or if I say, oh, but these people in the transatlantic slave trade, they'll be like, oh, well, that's not what the transatlantic slave trade was. This was actually the transatlantic slave trade, and this is where these people came from. Oh, you're mistaken. You're wrong, right? Or oh, this is the black people, African Americans. Oh, those people, they're not really black. This is just so I'm just saying. So when you look at the way that the system is designed, they control the definitions. Once you enter that reality of accepting their articulation as any form of a truth, you can't say like, oh, well, I'm going to come in and I'm going to take the transatlantic slave trade and I'm going to take the African Americans and I'm going to take the Igbos and I'm going to take these other tribes and I'm going to take the rulings of rabbinical teachers and then I'm going to say, hey, well, you know what? The premise of how the way that you told history is not fully complete, right? Because that's intellectually that's the movement, right? That's the movement. Like you're and you can say the same thing in Africa, right? Oh, okay, well, we're this, we're Bantus, all these different types of things. But you can only go so far with that. And the reason why I say that is because it's set up, because you're using their definitions, you're using their systems, right? So assessing that, and there's a lot of this came to me during the 7 weeks in Shavuot, the Omer, and it really like kind of like unfolded to me, like the only real conversation that I or any Jew really, has any basis of challenging the world is on the basis of the reality of the soul and its connection to God and all of its expressions, right? Because outside of that, it's like you can't use their premise. You can't use their history books to argue against them. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just the whole thing is set up. You can't go to college and think that you're going to find a way to oppose authority or power. Right? Like they got these kids, they go to college, they take classes, they go to organizing meetings, they have all these theories, and they're like, okay, well, this is how you oppose society, right? And they go to college and say, hey, this is how you challenge authority, this is how you talk truth to power, all these types of things. And they go out and they do it. Look at the Free Palestine movement, right? They're mostly white kids on, Ivy League colleges. They're fighting against this whole thing and, whatever. It's a whole thing, right? But the thing is, they all did the same strategies, right? Isn't that kind of weird? Like every place is the same. There was no unique expression of their protest, at Columbia versus, Harvard or some other, Berkeley or whatever. It's the same techniques. It's the same strategies, right? So why would a person think that such frame of thinking would allow them to supersede or in a productive way challenge the existing authority structure, right? And then and then they're able to shut down the protests in the same exact way, right? Make it illegal, this, start deporting people, this, blah, blah, blah. Same method. Right? So that's kind of like the framework. That's like the issue that we're dealing with here. It's like, people see what's going on around them and they look on what's going on around them and they say, okay, well, this is reality, this is fact, right? And it's not. It's not. It's like, so anyway, so with that being said, I have to move forward with this concept of the soul, right? And challenging the idea of the understanding of the soul being a religious idea, right? That is limited to religious texts, right? And also accepting that, you know, just because we don't have scientific tools to equate the soul, which, you know, I could argue maybe even by design, that it doesn't rule out of the soul's existence by virtue of life and death, right? I'm saying the difference between a person being alive and a not is the soul, or the vast amount of the soul still, you know, being outside of the realm of the body. Anyways, okay. So, anyways, with that being said, it's just a very, you know, important frame and direction, because it's like, I see now when we go in that perspective, now the whole system unfolds. Now we could talk about racism. Now we could talk about healthcare. Now we could talk about war. Now we could talk about what technological innovation is, what it is to imagine, you know, a greater, you know, a greater society, right? Because what is a greater society? The way that they frame the greater society today is based off of me achieving more pleasure, right? A greater society is a society I achieve more pleasure, right? That's how they're framing it now, right? But we're saying that no, that's not what a greater society is. A greater society is a society that accepts the soul, or the inner essence, or the inner qualities of everyone and everything around them. And from accepting these qualities, a new mode of conduct and engagement develops, you know, amongst the human, I don't want to use the word species, but the human, you know, the humankind, right? Like a new evolved sense of awareness, of sensitivities, of restrictions, of engagements, you know, all manifest to this expanded understanding. And that evolves within ourselves as it relates to our fellow man, nature, community, whatever, right? So that's what we're really talking about. Like, what is a higher potential of a human being? What is human potential? How, as a human being, how can I elevate higher? Now we're calling these things religion and religious technologies, but maybe in the future we will look at these things as, you know, like the same way how, you know, a stoplight prevents so much chaos between cars, right? We'll see the commandments and the concepts and the understandings from our prophets and our sages in that same way of just an operating part of society that makes it better, right? Because we'll understand that we have a soul. We understand that we're here for the soul's correction. We'll understand that everyone else is here for the correction. We'll understand that the world was created for the purpose of good, and we've given this duality of free will, but even the evil and the negativity, ultimately that will lead to good. Right? I mean, a person may have to go through a lot of transformations, and it may be painful, but ultimately it will lead to good. Any thoughts or concepts before we go further?
You know, yeah, I think, you know, just kind of just thinking about it, in particular, you know, dealing with the Igbos and dealing with African American, Hebrew Israelites, so forth. I think the biggest area to really pay attention to is the soul, and from that aspect, um, it's really about whether or not we're looking for what the person is trying to achieve. Okay, so if you have a person that's trying to achieve acceptance, then you fall under the guidelines of those that are the groups or organizations that one is trying to be accepted by. Um, but then there's another aspect of those that say, well, you know, hey, you know, man, we just, you know, we want to coexist. And from that standpoint, then there's a different level of standards or a different approach to what they're doing. But that's still the idea of when you coexist, that means that we're still two. You know, we're not the same. It's just that we're just kind of coexisting together. But then there's the others that say, hey, listen, look, um, just respect me as a person. That's it. And what that means is that respect me as a child of God. See me as a soul. And applaud my successes. Help me with my struggles, and I'll do the same for you. And I think that's where the real issue, because at this point, I'm not quite sure that historically, or because there's been a lot of destruction. There's been a lot of things that has happened throughout history to change history, um, to spin certain narratives. And so those that control those schools, or those that just the whole system that we're talking about, they have their rules, and they're controlling the system. And so it's we're at a point right now in history to whereas I believe it doesn't even matter anymore. It doesn't really even matter. I believe that what matters is the practice, is your morals. I believe that your connection, your direct connection to God. I was reading a chapter this morning in a really good book that I'm reading, and it was about spiritual democracy. And it's a concept that I've never really paid attention to, but it's a spiritual democracy, and it talks about how in Judaism there is no clergy, there is no layman, but rather that every individual, every soul is elevated to God. Every soul has that responsibility. And I think that when we really grasp that idea, that we all have that ability, I think that as far as Israel is concerned, whether we call ourselves a Jew, a Hebrew Israelite, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, whatever we want to call ourselves, it comes back down to whether or not, we say that we're Israel, we know that it's it's better when we're unified. Better when we're unified. And so, I think that with as far as like approaching the dynamic of like being accepted within certain communities and whatnot, I think that the whole idea is just whether or not a person is saying, hey, I want to be accepted in this community. And if we're talking about like conversion or whatnot, when it comes to conversion, I know with Hebrew Israelites, I believe that it'd be a little bit more simple if the mindset was, hey, listen, these people don't want to be called Gentiles. They don't want to label themselves as Gentiles. They don't have a Gentile mindset. They don't consider themselves Gentiles at all. And I don't think it's a good thing to spend a lot of time trying to prove to a group that they're Gentiles. It'll never work. So developing a program to where you're saying, okay, look, hey, these people, that it's very possible that they are Jews, by the simple fact that they will kidnap babies, kidnap children, kidnap babies, and they have a strong desire to return to Torah. And that shows, based off of our ideology, that they have a Jewish soul. And so we're not going to look at the body like, and I see where you're going with that, because the world that we live in, they look at skin color, they look at physique, they look at all of these things. Okay, but that same magnifying glass is not turned on everyone. And so I think that, yeah, just let's look at the soul and see what direction this soul is going in, and leave it at that. And so, good, Rabbi.
Yeah, so on a couple points. It's like you just have to understand what you're up against, right? And what is making what's making emotional what is the attempt of emotional change versus rational change, right? And yesterday we talked about this idea. I think it was either yesterday or the day before yesterday. We talked about this idea of, the two most important things you'll say to, like a man would say to his wife. I told you that principle is thank you and sorry, right? But out of that came another idea of explaining that came to me, I think it was like yesterday morning, which is this idea of the creativity of the sun and versus the creativity of the moon, right? So the example that I want to make is like this, like, people who know, like the music industry, I'm going to use the music industry to kind of like build this idea, right? So the creativity of the sun is coming from the perspective of, like, say you have a person who, loves music, plays music, records music. And so they, you know, basically are pouring their heart out and putting it into songs and melodies and, through instruments and their voice, all types of things. And maybe some people like it, maybe some people don't, right? Everyone has their own style, this, whatever. There's different, trends that are going on. Maybe the music's in the trend, maybe it's not. So that person will be coming from the perspective of the creativity of the sun, where they're just like putting it out. The creativity of the moon is coming from the place of receiving, right? Meaning that their objective is looking at the aspect of within, meaning that if I'm going to share something, it's not just about me just sharing it, it's about me understanding who I'm sharing to, why I'm sharing it to them, and what's the best way to share it to them, right? And so that is a songwriter who writes a song for the times, right? They see what type of melodies are being used on the radio. They're seeing what type of word usages. They're looking at what type of images are being created through the vocals and all these things. They're seeing all that, and out of seeing that, they create a song, right? Like Michael Jackson was great at that. He was able to change with the times. The Beatles were able to change with the times, right? And it's like you see this dynamic of, okay, hey, here's a new sound or here's a new trend or whatever, but I'm able to apply my art to it. Another way to look at it, the creativity of the sun versus the creativity of the moon is like, say, in business, right? So in business, like there's two types of guys. Like there's, like basically, if you could imagine the idea of going into a meeting, right? So the meeting context is that there's one person sitting on one side of the table and another person sitting on another side of the table. And so, obviously in between them is a table, right? And so on one side of the table, there's a person who is looking to acquire something. And on the other side of the table, there's a person looking to sell something, right? Now, the things like this, the person who's looking to sell, the more he knows about what the buyer wants and what the infrastructure of the buyer's company is looking to achieve, it increases his likelihood to provide them something in this engagement, right? So like for example, like if I would go to a meeting, like, it wasn't about like, oh, like, I mean, I have a bunch of things I want to do. What I wanted to do was understand what they were trying to accomplish, what they were trying to achieve in their infrastructure, and then I will go in that. And so, like, for example, when I was a kid, very young, I had a marketing company, and it was like we made a lot of money. Like we were like kids, and I'm talking I couldn't have been more than like 24, 25 years old, but we were doing like $50,000 a month. But it was just me and one of my friends from my, he didn't go to high school with me, but he lived close by me, whatever. But how did we do that? Like basically, like we started to work with publications, and a lot of the publications had issues because everything was starting to go on the internet. And so their offline subscriptions were going down, right? Which affects, their advertisement revenue and this type of thing. So it's a whole big story how I got involved in this aspect of business. But basically, I created a series of partnerships with them with clubs. So like when people bought tickets to a club at night, I'm talking about like a nightclub, like a concert, because LA is like a huge concert club scene. So at nighttime, it's like most of you have bars, you have like lounges, and then you have clubs, and then you have like in between that you have people a lot of performances, right? And people go out for live entertainment. I don't know about now, but when I was there, I did, and so I was very much involved in that whole like promotion and music scene, whatever. And so what I did was I because I knew all the promoters there, I worked deals with the promoters and basically partnered or was able to bundle, ticket sales for that night with like a Rolling Stone magazine or LA Times subscription or whatever. And so the LA Times, the way that they work, they're like, hey, you know what? If someone buys a $5 subscription, we'll pay you $25, right? And so what I would do is that have I would go to the club promoter and I'll say, hey, you know what? I'll get $25 every time somebody from someone buys a ticket to your event, because we're going to incorporate that they'll sign up for LA Times subscription as well, right? It's part of the cost. And so what I'll do is I'll pay you back that $5 and I'll pay you an additional, say $3 or something like that, $4 per person that signs up. So he's looking at it like, hey, instead of my ticket sales being, $20 a pop, now my ticket sales is $24 a pop. I'm making $24 a pop by this partnership. Anyway, so we did that a lot of places. We spread it around, whatever. It kind of like fell off, when we really wanted to expand it, because there was a lot of fraud in this subscription stuff. There's a whole like deep business, like the whole subscriptions and advertisement. So there's a lot of fraud, and they were cracking down on really creative programs. Anyways, it halted that business model. But the point is saying I was able to do that deal with some of the biggest publications, because of the fact that I was dealing with their needs, right? And so this is a very important tool, as you can see, like in business, whatever. But the key to this aspect, and it's a very important tool, especially for kids, right? Because kids, and when I say kids, I'm not saying just like people who are under 18 or under 13. I'm talking about like even adults that are kids, right? What I've noticed is that a lot of people that I'm running into, because this is like a whole new world, like being single and this whole dynamic, and like looking to get remarried and just meeting different people, guys and girls. Because before this I was like married for almost like 4 years, right? And then before that I was in yeshiva for like 5 years before, so I was like in this whole insulary type thing. And so and I was only being introduced to one type of girl per se, you know what I mean, that came from a similar type of learning or whatever. So now I'm meeting a lot of people, right? And a lot of people single, and a lot of people that I'm meeting single were single when I was single, and they're still single. And what I've really noticed is a consistent trait that I've seen in people is this dynamic of a lack of empathy, right? Being able to feel the person next to them, be able to understand the person next to them. Like in marriage, you kind of have to do that in order to survive. But in general, but some people I think have had different experiences in their life where they had to be very defensive or very protective over themselves, and they weren't able to develop in certain areas, right? And so it's a certain aspects of development were not met. And so one of those aspects of development is the ability to empathize with other people, to be able to think in a way, and not in a frame of manipulation, right? Because that's also a form of trauma, right? Being able to outsmart people or trick people or play on insecurities, this type of thing. I'm talking about the aspect of being able to make connections, right? And to be able to build genuine, lasting bonds in relationships with people by being able to understand the other person, being able to empathize with the other person, to be able to be flexible with that other person. And so that element, could come from, as a kid, you have siblings and this, and, this whole idea of consideration. But you could see that this is like a key component with a relationship with a God, right? Because if you cannot, if you're desensitized to the people around you, right, and you're desensitized to the impact or or what you and your behavior is doing to them, then that means that you have a disconnection with the way God is impacting you, right? And a life that you have. So it's not just the fact of, a person's, oh, he's narcissistic or she's narcissistic or whatever, but it's the fact is that that person is suffering from that same reality, right? That same reality that paralyzes that individual is the same reality that is the driving force in even in a lot of that person's personality, right? Like people want to think about like my personality is part of my demise, right? Meaning the way that I act, the way that my behavior is, the way I perceive things, the way I connect with other people is part of my thing. So that creativity of the moon is the basis of understanding this concept of how do I express myself with empathy? How do I feel the other person? Because sometimes if people, have traumatic experiences in their life and they skip certain parts, and that's why a lot of young people, or people in general, when they want to build intimacy with people, they run to sex, right? Like a lot of young people or people in general run to sex. Why? Because they have not built those faculties within themselves to create an empathetic process to get to know and build a cultivated relationship, right? Because they don't have the creativity of the moon, meaning they don't know how to relate to another person, right? They don't know how to sustain a relationship with another person other through that means, right? Because it's a form of emotional bond or even trauma bond that comes along with those experiences, outside of, a frame of holiness of marriage, right? And so I'm seeing that, like, as a single, and it's like people are willing to go to that place first before actually building something that you could build off of, right? That when you do get to that place of connection on that level, that there's an actual real play, there's something that was actually built, right? Like it's something there. It's not just experience or these types of things. It's actually something that leads to the next stage, right? The next stage of closeness, right? And so anyway, so that's the point. So it's this idea of just thinking about this idea of the creativity of the moon and being able to kind of like reanalyze things, from that perspective. Like what is it that the other person, and that's the whole thing of like when we talked about thank you, right? From those two statements, right? So thank you represented this idea of, hey, guess what? You just did something really, you were just standing over there and you were just thinking about me. And you were thinking, how much can I make this moment more enjoyable for him? And that's why you brought me this. It wasn't just simply that, you know, um, you know, it wasn't just the fact that you were in the refrigerator and you say, hey, I'm gonna take some beers out. No, you really had that in consideration, right? So that by me saying thank you with that awareness, I've now entered that world of the creativity of the moon, right? The creativity of the sun is just the accept it and say thank you through formality, right? But the deeper aspect, the essence of this idea is to say that no, or say I'm sorry, right? It's not that you're just saying sorry about what happened, but you're actually taking into account the emotional state that's being developed through this experience, right? And you can empathize with that along with what went wrong. The fact that the person's hurting, regardless of what exactly happened, is its own world in itself. So that creativity of the moon was this. And then and we're going to go into Derech, Hashem, as you can see, it's in front of us, but I'll say like this. So, and I'm not being like, this is not a point of hypersensitivity, like being hypersensitive, because it's not about that, right? Because people are people, no one's going to be perfect, whatever. But when you're out, and I guess this is a new Torah, right? It's like single Torah, right? Like you're finding that right partner in this new beginning, right? Type of a thing. And so, there's this girl that it's like one of the upsides. It's not a criticism of the Jewish community, right? But it's just like it's a thing that I just think it's this culture where it's like if there's two black people just automatically assume that, and it's like black Americans really aren't like that. In other parts of the world, like two people from Italy is going to make sense. Two people from France are going to make sense. Two people from Even Nigeria could make sense. But like in America, it's like it's not like that. You know what I mean? Like if someone's maybe from a similar background as you, has similar upbringings as you, similar experiences, this other, then maybe you can say that. But that's irregardless of their race, right? But it's just a thing people do anyway. So it's this one girl, and she's like, I don't know, I think she's like African or something like this, like from Togo or something. I don't know. Anyways, she's like some lawyer here, whatever, like big personality, whatever. And so like people are like knowing that I'm single, whatever. And so people are like, oh, this girl and blah, blah, blah. And she has the same name as my ex too, by the way. And so it's just like she's like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And I told this girl that, that I recently met like a little while ago, like she's been talking to me and she mentioned this girl as well, because she's also friends with her. And I was just saying, in confidentiality, I was just saying that like I remember I met this girl years ago. And then it's when I first became, it was like right when I was becoming a rabbi. I wasn't a rabbi yet, but I was like in rabbinical school. And someone was saying like, oh, he's becoming a rabbi, this, blah, 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 blah. And then she responded and said, oh, well, why not become a dayan, right? Like a judge, right? Which, eventually that did happen, right? But the point is just saying that, I took that as like a slight. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, is that a big deal? No, that's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. But that little point of saying like, not being cognitive enough to say like, oh, wow, like I'm a rabbinical student. It's obviously a big deal. It's actually a great thing. My response shouldn't be like, oh, well, what about becoming a guy? I should first, like one, like, say, wow, that's amazing. Give support and this, blah, 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 ask some question. And if I want them to think bigger, right, then I could maybe bring that on, assuming that was the intention behind it, right? But the point is, I said to her, I said, that's not a big deal, right? But it's an insight to personality, right? And I'm not saying I'm not attracted to the person that much either, but I'm just saying the point is saying it's an insight to personality. And so the point is just saying that those little details are the basis of how to understand how you can have a home with somebody and what type of emotional intelligence you're going to have in the home, because you have this responsibility of raising these kids in a kosher way, and it could go like totally left, right? You see a lot of disaster stories because the parents didn't have proper midot in the house, right? They didn't have proper respect amongst each other. They were doing things behind each other's back. It was secrets, it was fights, it's all these things. And then you try to mix that in with Judaism and Shomer Shabbat and want your kids to love Torah and these types of things, and they see these things in the house, it's going to be a disaster, right? And most of those kids end up coming to Israel trying to fix it in their adult years, right? Trying to relearn Judaism, right? And so you have to really be very hypersensitive and aware of like, hey, what is the emotional state of this person that I'm entering into this union with? Because it's not just about me. Maybe I could be like, hey, for me, I could get around it. I'm cool, blah, blah, blah. But this person is raising your kids, right? And if they instinctively have not developed and worked on at least those aspects, or they don't have those aspects innate, you could really, create a situation where it could create a lot of challenges for kids. Like, for example, like when people have mental health issues, how they relate to children is much different than people that don't. And depending on what that mental health issue is, it's like, them connecting to the children emotionally and all these different factors that exist. You got to really be aware of that. Anyways, so we did a big introduction. We're not going to be able to finish this chapter in this particular thing, but we're going to be able to get through it, right? So this is what Ram Call, this is Derech Hashem, and this is this idea of the purpose of creation. So we're going to make this a two-part. So we're only going to go through a little bit of it, and then tomorrow we just boom, 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 we go faster. But it's important to have context, right? Because this wisdom that we're learning, this is the future, right? This is the future of everything. The future of everything is the neshama, right? We see it in the workforce. We see AI technology. We see automation. We see all these things happening, and that's showing us that the human physical labor is not. It's going to be the intelligence of the human being, and it's going to be the uniqueness of that intelligence that allows us to really contribute. So it says, Vahine tequila bria, haye lehativ mi tuvo. So he says like the purpose of creation, right? So last class, we went into the creator itself, the sovereignty of the creator, the whole concept of the creator. Now we're going to the second part, which we already said we're going to do two parts, which is the purpose of creation, right? Now this is really interesting. I read it, earlier, and I was looking. I was like, wow, like this is really coded in a way, but it's not. But we have the language. We know what the codes are. It's to the purpose of creation. See that the purpose of creation was to give from His goodness. May He be blessed to another. May He be blessed. He wanted to give His goodness to the other, right? So in the beginning, God had this desire to bestow His benevolence. Why this? We don't know. We can't figure it out. It's a whole big thing. But He wanted to share that to what? The vessels, right? So again, we have the code, so we can explain what He's saying. He says, and behold, he says, see that He's alone in true perfection, devoid of any deficiencies. Right? We established that. And there is no other perfection like it. So it comes out that any perfection that resembles it, besides His perfection, may be blessed, is not true perfection. Rather, is called perfection relative to something more deficient than it. So there's nothing more absolute and perfect than the Creator. Even things that seem to be perfect, it's just more perfect than things that are deficient. But complete perfection is only His perfection. May He be blessed. And therefore, since His desire, may be blessed, was to do good to others, it would not be sufficient for Him to do a little good, but rather only in giving the full goodness that is possible for any creature to receive. Right? So everyone has different vessels. The trees have different vessels, and the rocks, and humans have different vessels. He says Israel has a different vessel than other nations. And it says, and in His alone may be blessed, being the true God. His good desire would only be satisfied by giving others that very good within Him. He's explaining the process of the giving. He says, and from the angel, from the angle of Himself, which is the true perfect, with His truly perfect good, yet truly from another angle, this good is impossible to be found anywhere but in Him. So this good that we're talking about is a good that holds up all of reality. Therefore, His wisdom decreed that the nature of His true giving would be that a place be given to the creatures to cleave to Him. May He be blessed according to the measure of what is possible for them to cleave. And so it comes out that what would be impossible from the angle of themselves, they would be described by the same perfection as His perfection. May He be blessed. Nevertheless, nevertheless surely comes to them according to the measure that is possible for them to be described by His perfection. But be blessed, the angle of their cleaving to Him comes out of the benefit of the true good. So he's saying things we learned before, right, in a different language, right? So in essence, this dynamic that all things that are created emanate from the Shem's goodness, right? And even if they express themselves in a negative way, the root of them is to eventually be transformed into goodness. So in essence, all things in reality cling to this goodness of the Creator, right? And He bestows goodness upon them, right? And we could say, instead of goodness, you could say light, right? And when we say perfection, being able to see the full circle of how everything is connected and everything's to your benefit. He says, likewise, it comes out that His intentions may be that He be blessed in creation, and that He created was to create something that could benefit from His goodness. So He's given His basis of those original vessels, right? Those original vessels that received God's goodness, that eventually, had another idea. He says, "Anayin hashalimot vehachsuot vekaniti." Wait. Vekaniti, yeah. Vekanit. He said the nature of perfection and deficiency. So let's understand what perfection is. Perfection is the understanding of the full connection to Hashem. Deficiencies is not seeing that. So he said the nature of perfection and deficiencies and the acquisition of perfection, right? So we're going to stop here on this point, but we're going to read this part. He says, however, his wisdom decreed that in that good, that in that, or, however, his wisdom decreed that in that this good is perfect, it is fitting that one who benefits from it owns the good, meaning that it acquires the goodness himself and not just join him in a congruent way, whatever. So what he's saying is he's saying that it's not enough that we receive God's light, right? That's not the purpose of creation, that we just, we lay on the beach and we just receive. He said, but rather that goodness, that mechanism of how God bestows his light and his reality, we should emulate that. We should become good. He says, however, his wisdom decreed that is good and perfect is fitting for one to benefit on his own, that good, meaning one acquires the goodness of self and not one that just to join and connect to the creator. So it's not just that it's enough to learn the Torah and get a high from an idea, but rather how it should change your nature. And see that this is called a resemblance in measure that it is possible. To his perfection may he be blessed. For surely he may his name be blessed, is perfect for himself and not and not contingently so. I don't know why I can't say this word. Rather, from the angle of truth of his nature, he requires to have that perfection, and he is necessarily devoid of deficiency. However, it is impossible that he be found with anyone besides him. Okay. Ah, so he's saying that part of this finding of perfection is the relationship with deficiency, right? And he says, however, it is impossible that he be found in any one besides him, that his truth requires him to have his perfection and be devoid of deficiency. Right. So our perfection is to see that we've never had a lack. It's only a mechanism that Hashem has created for us. Yet to resemble it a little, it requires that it at least acquires the perfection that the truth of the nature does not require and move the deficiency that were possible in it. Therefore, he decreed. Therefore, he decreed and arranged that the matter of perfection and the matter of deficiency be created. And a creature be created that would have the equal possibility of both of these matters, and that mechanism be given to this creature through which it could acquire the perfections for itself and remove the deficiencies from itself. And then it would happen that it would become similar to the creator, in that it would be in that which is possible for it, and it would be fitting to cleave to him and benefit from his goodness. Okay, so again, very technical language, very technical language. It's very technical in this. But the point is that what he's saying is saying that he's going into the early stages of this dynamic, which is saying that, hey, there's a creator, right? And this creator created a reality to bestow his goodness. And this goodness that the creator wanted to bestow was not limited to just a frame of receiving, but the creation itself of receiving this goodness would eventually evolve its character in itself to be like the creator and also become a part of this sharing mechanism in this world, right? And this is the purpose of creation. Any thoughts, reflections?
Shalom, Rabbi. We can't hear you.
I was saying, is there any thoughts or reflection?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, so we're in here just because just the timing, and I want to go and pray really quickly. But yeah, we'll continue on. Please try to review it. It's very technical language, and if you have any questions from the review, we could discuss that in the beginning of the class tomorrow.
Sure. Okay. Toda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shalom. Shalom.
Shalom. Was there any points or no?
Oh no, I didn't have anything.
All right. So yeah, so it's just basically, so we're just going through the steps, and I think not only the content is important, but the structure, I think, also is more important, right? Because this idea of the contemplation of the system is just important as a system. So like in part one, where the first part is the structure is the creator. The second part is the purpose of creation. Now we're going to move on to mankind, right? And then we're going to move on to human responsibility, and then we move to the second or the last one, which is spiritual realm. Obviously, we have to see what those mean, but the point is just saying that's the structure we're going off of. So I'm not extending the classes, like I'm trying to put them in sections so it makes it easier to review. So I'm not, if you see what I'm saying. Anyway, so we'll continue on. Baruch atah Adonai